Have you rushed to the ER because you were convinced you were dying? You had heart palpitations, shortness of breath. Maybe you had acid reflux, so maybe you had some digestive symptoms, but basically it was the heart palpitations, the shortness of breath that freaked you out, and on top of that you were having an anxiety attack. So you get to the ER, they do a workup on you, and they tell you you're fine. Maybe they say you had a panic attack, or maybe they say you have acid reflux, but your heart's fine, it wasn't a heart attack, and you weren't dying. What was it though? It's called Hiatal Hernia Syndrome, and the symptoms are very commonly having acid reflux, having gas and bloating, and in addition to that, getting this shortness of breath and heart palpitations and anxiety or panic attacks that seem to come out of the blue. And it's not 24/7, it's on and off. But what is it that you can really do about it? I have good news. The solutions are natural. Now this is, of course, you've been to the cardiologist, you went to the ER, you're not having a heart attack, you don't have heart disease. So of course, we have successfully ruled that out. I'm talking to those of you who are in this category because you keep having these miserable, scary symptoms and you're told your heart is fine. Let's jump into it. The first thing that we look at is diet. Of course, what's going into your gut. Now, food sensitivities are a common component with this, meaning something you're eating that you like to eat that your body is treating more like a toxin than it is food. So that's one thing that we need to look at. Number two, though, is what is your body doing with the food that you're eating? And that has to do with digestion, motility, meaning how fast or slow is food moving through your bowels. Now, your stomach should digest food for 2 to 4 hours before it moves on to your small intestine. You might be the person who feels like you swallowed a brick and it just kind of sits there, and you have the bloat and you have the pressure and it's pretty miserable. So things are moving too slowly. So we just have to figure out why. Now, PPIs come into the equation on this with this condition very, very often. Why is that? Because you have acid reflux, and that's a symptom that's not only very common, pretty easy to diagnose. And so you have the burn and your doctor says you have reflux, here's an antacid. It's called a proton pump inhibitor, or PPI. Now, if you have an ulcer, if you want to take this temporarily to kind of heal things because the acid has been pushing up into your esophagus for a while and there's so much irritation and there's so much burn, it can be used for that. And that's what it was designed for, is anywhere from 2 to 12 weeks, so maximum 3 months. But if you're listening to this, you might be on PPIs for not only many, many months, but years or even decades. And I meet people like this all the time. So the problem with this is that reflux, the problem is still happening. You just can't feel it because you're on an antacid. Now, that might be fine. You go, well, it's like a Band-Aid, you know, it makes my cut feel better. Sure, if it was only as innocuous as a Band-Aid. It is not. Actually, what PPIs do is they make the underlying problem worse and have it more likely to continue. So what the research says is you should not be on these for longer than 12 weeks at a time. And it's not getting to the reason why you have the problem. Your stomach is a bag of acid for a reason. What it does, number one, is it kills bad organisms. So it's a bag of hydrochloric acid. There are microorganisms in our food, and the acid will kill them. That's what it should do. It also begins digestion. It begins protein digestion, plus allows you to absorb certain key minerals like calcium, magnesium, zinc, iron, folic acid, vitamin B12. That's why when you're long-term on PPIs, you're more likely to get infections because the bad guys have not gotten killed, osteoporosis or brittle bones because you're not absorbing your magnesium and your calcium, dementia because you're not absorbing your vitamin B12, also risk of heart disease, stomach cancer, on and on. It's a long list. And because you're not killing those bad organisms, now they're getting throughout your digestive tract, creating the inflammation and the bloat that's caused the whole problem to begin with. So long term, the PPIs are really not your friend. There's also a nervous system component to this problem, and it has to do with your vagus nerve, which is your longest cranial nerve. But your vagus nerve connects your brain to your gut, and it dictates how fast or slow the digestive tract is working. So if the vagus tone, as it's called, is low, meaning the vagus nerve is irritated, then things are not moving at the proper flow that they should. And if things are moving slowly, that's when you get that overfull feeling. Again, it allows organisms to happily multiply because they're not moving through the digestive tract as quickly as it should. And then you get the brain connection to this problem. This is where the anxiety comes in, or the depression, the anxiousness and trouble sleeping. You're just feeling on edge all the time. It's called being in fight or flight, you know. So fight or flight is fun when you're doing something like I'm doing and doing a video and you're excited about it. But it's not fun when you're trying to relax, or you're trying to digest, or you're trying to sleep. And so fight or flight, you will be more predisposed to being in that part of your nervous system if your vagal tone is low. And what's so interesting about the vagus nerve is that the vagus nerve influences how the gut is working, but then the gut, if it's irritated, is putting pressure on the vagus nerve. So they're playing off one another. So you have to handle them both. Breathing, you say, I do it all the time, but the problem with that is that how are you breathing? So if you're in that more fight or flight mode, you have shallow breathing. You can see people move their upper part of their chest and their shoulders. We want that deep belly breathing, or diaphragmatic breathing. Your diaphragm is not only your breathing muscle, but it actually acts to prevent acid reflux. So the mechanics of all this are really quite fascinating. That stomach brings the acid up because it's being pushed up. Why is it being pushed up? It's over full, digestion is too slow. You have other factors creating inflammation in your gut, like all the bad bacteria I mentioned. Maybe you're overweight and you have a lot of adiposity or fat around your midsection, and that's creating constant pressure. Maybe you just wear really tight clothes and you eat and you have really tight clothes on, and it doesn't allow digestion to occur as rapidly. That's an easy one, of course, but the rest of it has to be investigated to get to the root cause of why we have this pressure and inflammation. And then we have the natural anti-reflux barriers, which are that the diaphragm acts as one, your esophagus has an anti-reflux barrier, but if there's too much pressure, those barriers are going to be breached. So it's really about getting to the root cause of the pressure so that digestion can occur as it's meant to, and we don't have the hiatal hernia, we don't have the pressure on the diaphragm, which can also create shortness of breath, and we don't have the elevation of the stomach and the elevation of the diaphragm due to that pressure that starts to interfere with the heart, because the heart is right above the stomach. What's between them is only the diaphragm. So the stomach rises, the diaphragm elevates, and then there's a sac around the heart. It gets irritated and you can have heart palpitations. There's also a reflex, so not reflux, but a reflex between your stomach and your heart, your esophagus and your heart. So if you have that irritation of the stomach or the esophagus because of acid, that can reflexively cause heart palpitations, even atrial fibrillation. So the connection is one that's not terribly appreciated in our medical system, that tends to be quite siloed, meaning you have digestive problems, you see the gastroenterologist, your heart is flip-flopping or having atrial fibrillation or tachycardia, you see the cardiologist, you have shortness of breath, you see the pulmonologist, and it's fine to see all those people. But the problem is that when you don't have the lung disease and you don't have the heart disease, the gastroenterologist is not going to put together the fact that all these other symptoms that seem to be coming from other systems in your body actually have a root cause, but they do. I know how miserable it is to suffer from this because we've specialized in it for over 30 years now. And what's exciting is that a natural approach works a great deal of the time, statistically a very high percentage of the time, by, of course, being willing to do some diet and nutritional changes. I'm going to finish up this video with some kind of key tips that you can start with, and then if you need more help, there's testing that can be done. It's not a one-size-fits-all problem. It's not take magnesium, take apple cider vinegar. It's why do you have this problem? What is the root cause for you? And how do we identify that, treat those root causes naturally so you don't continue to have this problem? Because What's interesting about digestive health is it's not an overstatement to say that if your digestive tract is not working properly, it's impossible to have ideal health. Impossible, because it's turning food into fuel. Your immune system, 70% of it is housed in your gut. The way your gut talks to your brain to balance hormones and stress, it's all very tied together. So that's why it's so critical to get to the root cause of this as soon as you can. So, some tips. I'm going to look at my notes. We want to eat smaller meals. You want to be very mindful of when you're no longer hungry versus over full. You know, you have to kind of chew your food well, eat slowly, and kind of put your fork down in between bites. So you have that time to get that message from your brain that, hey, I'm no longer hungry. You can stop eating, because that over full eating too big a meal is going to offset this. You want to take a walk after you eat, even if it's 10 minutes. This is a stroll. We're not jogging. But to help the motility in the gut, it's very important. Avoiding large meals late at night. You want a good 3 hours between your last morsel of food and lying down to go to bed. So look at that timing. Try not to eat a huge meal at night. Eat a good meal, but it shouldn't be huge, not over fatty, not something where you're sitting there going, oh, why did I eat all that? That's really going to aggravate this condition. Practicing belly breathing, it's called box breathing, or you can also look up the physiological sigh. This really helps train the diaphragm that you want to be strong, so it acts as a nice anti-reflux barrier. It's also very supportive of the vagus nerve, so you're increasing vagal nerve tone, which is going to help anxiousness, it's going to help sleep, and it's going to help digestion. So breathing exercise is something you can do anywhere at any time, and very, very helpful in this condition. If you're somebody who's had chronic gas, chronic constipation, maybe irritable bowel syndrome, you want to reach out and find a clinician who's very savvy at this, especially one who understands hiatal hernia syndrome alongside, and really get to the root cause. Because with chronic constipation, gas, bloat, irritable bowel syndrome, if that's not handled, it's really going to be impossible to resolve this situation. We have to get that inflammation down and get to the root cause. It's not difficult. You just have to have the right help. So I hope this was helpful for you. And if it was, give the video a thumbs up, consider subscribing, share it with a friend who's maybe suffering, because this can be a really miserable experience, but it doesn't have to. We'll talk soon.